This is a growing attack surface. It's only going to get worse. And it spurred on these conversations with the board that like we need to start to put, just to protect ourselves from this, of if it's not face to face, a financial transaction, to put safe words or safe codes into transaction limits to prevent this kind of stuff.
Welcome to the Head of the Breach podcast. I'm Casey Camilleri. We talk everything offensive security with industry experts and leaders in the cybersecurity realm. I'm here with Dan Creed. Dan Creed has 25 years of experience. He's currently a CISO of Allegiant Travel, formerly held positions as head of infrastructure security at Facebook and Meta, and has plenty of expertise all throughout his years of everything cybersecurity, operationals, risk management, and it goes on and on. I probably didn't even do that justice, but thanks for being here, Dan.
Yeah, my pleasure, Casey. We've had a good friendship over the years and had the opportunity to work together a few times.
Yeah, and it's been great. So how many years have you been coming to Black Hat and DEF CON?
I've been coming since DEF CON 3. So, before Black Hat, because DEF CON spawned Black Hat. So,
do you have any good stories from back then?
Oh, there's so many fond memories of, back in the day, I can remember being at Alexis Park and getting tips on, that there was going to be an FBI and the Spot the Fed game and tossing cell phones out a window to avoid FBI raids. It's so many memories and fun stories and shenanigans, ATMs taking over, like walking into a casino and seeing that is not the normal screen displayed by an ATM.
Oh, I remember in the days, like you just walk through and you see all those ATMs just like either blue screen or at a command prompt, right?
And recently we had that with CrowdStrike too.
Yeah, right. Oops. Now, you were telling me a little bit about deepfake work that you've been doing. And you told me a pretty cool story before we started recording here about how you use deepfakes in the boardroom. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so at our last board presentation last month, I did a demonstration on deepfakes because a couple months ago, there was a financial institution in Hong Kong that they did a deepfake of the CFO. So, it started with a traditional business email compromise attack. They were skeptical. Guys like, well, jump on a Zoom call with me. And so sets up the Zoom call with the employee. And sure enough, it looks like the CFO. You can see people walking around in the background. It looks like, their offices and stuff, and socially engineered $25 million out of the company.
Wow.
And so it's a growing attack surface. Like you can do this with off-the-shelf hardware these days. And I wanted to show our board, how we're thinking about future attack surface and that this is a big up and coming risk. So I did a deepfake for the board presentation where I literally did 3 different levels of deepfake. The first one being where you take their actual image, sync your lip and facial movements to it and move around. Being the first level, that stuff's fairly easy to spot because background doesn't match and, there are tells on that. And then the second level to that is I generated a deepfake image based off of a single image, downloaded of them off the internet and overlaid their face on my face and showed them a level 2 example. And then there's a level 3. I literally took from our chairman of the board, roughly 15, and I think it was like 19 minutes of video from him from all different angles, dissected it image by image and fed that into an LLM to do a fully rendered 3D model based on AI deepfake of him mimicking, overlaying his entire head on my head.
That's crazy. You did this all just average laptop, average compute, nothing crazy.
Average is relative, but yeah, a computer you could go in and buy at, Micro Center, Best Buy today. RTX 4090 in it, and 64 gigs of RAM and 24 cores.
Okay.
And so it's a beefy laptop. We're looking at but $5,000 worth of hardware. And the time that I put into doing it and just using Deepfakes Lab, I could teach a teenager how to do that in a couple of hours.
Nice. You should teach me how to do it.
And, like I said, this is a growing attack surface. It's only going to get worse. And it spurred on these conversations with the board that we need to start to put, just to protect ourselves from this, of if it's not face-to-face, a financial transaction, to put safe words or safe codes into transaction limits to prevent this kind of stuff.
I was going to ask you, how do you think we should combat that? Because I feel like nowadays we're going to have it's kind of like a PGP signature, right? An email, like we're going to need that for like every sourced interaction that we have with someone, right? To know that you're talking to someone and who you're actually really speaking with, right? Is the person. Like, how do you think we're going to tackle that moving forward?
I mean, it's tough because there's multiple attack scenarios to it now. And like, that was part of my message walking away from the board's meeting is I attended the first half of it in a Teams meeting. And Microsoft, Zoom, Citrix, it doesn't matter. Like I can do it in any of them and they don't detect it at all. They don't detect anything's amiss. So like the big companies haven't solved for this problem yet. So like I said, right now, old school will implement some kind of passphrase or something to signify that only they would know that it's them.
Yeah.
That would have to be socially engineered out of them. Outside of that, I think it's evolving space and I'm kind of waiting to see what the industry comes up with to solve for that. But like, then you look at use cases, like, honestly, I'm surprised that the government, and they probably are, especially being in an election year, super fearful of this stuff, but like,
Right.
could start to do this to generals and, high ranking officials. And, we're already seeing more and more deepfake actions going on like that. Like I said, it's an attack surface that's just going to continue to grow.
How did the board respond to that actually?
I think they kind of walked away from it going, thank God he's on our side.
There you go.
I mean, I think it was really eye opening to them in seeing how easily one could do this. Like I said, I could teach a teenager how to do it in a couple of hours with off the shelf hardware, and I also made that statement in the board meeting. Now imagine a threat actor who's going to I invested $5,000 laptop in this. Now imagine somebody who's going to invest $20,000 and 3 months of time into this, what they can do. Because it's a good example, like for, any of you sci-fi fans who watched The Mandalorian, when Luke Skywalker, they did the deepfake of young Luke Skywalker in the last episode of the first season of that. The open source community, somebody else actually did a better deepfake of that than ILM did. That ILM then went back and actually hired him.
I did not know that story. That's pretty crazy. Now, you spent a lot of time in boardrooms, being a CISO and advising. Do you have any recommendations, any tips for how to conduct yourself in the boardroom, how to present and showcase risk, and how to interact with leadership?
I mean, one is be humble about it. Like your job is not to be the no person. Your job isn't even to accept the risk. Like it's a business. It's the board's business and leadership's business to determine what their appetite for risk is. Always keep in perspective that your job is to identify the risk, to help quantify what that risk is, and then, to help weigh in so that they can make an intelligent decision on if the risk is acceptable or not. And be willing to say, like, I don't think this is a good idea. I'm not willing to accept the risk. But if the business wants to accept that risk and feels it's within the appetite of risk of the business is free to sign off on that risk and don't take it personal. Like, it's business. You have to make money. And if you get bit by that risk, you did your due diligence. You communicated and quantified what the risk was, and the business decided to accept it. It's just part of business. You can't do business without risk. If you have a customer, there's a risk. If you have an employee, there's a risk.
So when you slide them that paper to say, sign off on this risk, they think twice and ask for another meeting just to make sure they know what they're signing off on when they accept risk?
I mean, sometimes they ask for another meeting. And like, if you look at breaches in the last year, like the largest breach is MGM. If you look at the stuff that's gone on with Snowflake that led to, in theory, Ticketmaster and stuff, SolarWinds itself was a weak password from an intern. People and relationships are important, and, make sure that you have that relationship, that they do think twice and they have enough respect for you and enough trust in your expertise to at least give them pause on, well, if he thinks that this is an unacceptable risk, maybe we shouldn't too. But like I said, sometimes they override you and it is an acceptable risk, but you also have to be reasonable about it. Like I can think of an incident recently where we needed to put some prod data temporarily in a stage environment to do some testing just during migration. And, the cost to the business of not doing that, from the disruption that it would have cost the airline, because they would have had to take an outage of multiple days that, would have cost the business multiple millions of dollars, where the risk profile based on the dwell time of, okay, that data is going to exist in there for 24 hours of, oh, okay, that's an acceptable risk.
Right.
It's normally against policy. Like if you wanted to do this in the long term, I'd be like, no, like that's not an acceptable risk.
Right.
But weighing the operational impact of the business versus the short duration, it came up with an, agreement on what's an acceptable risk profile and went to the board with that where, again, they're confident now where we've identified the risk, we quantified it, and we had the conversation of
Right.
what's an acceptable amount of time and risk for the business that everybody agreed and signed off on. That's the other big thing with dealing with boards and CISOs is an evolving space. I got asked this question recently by an aspiring younger person who wants to become a CISO who their current CISO was pushing in the debate of should I get my MBA or should I get my MS of, oh, you should get your MS. And like my stance on that is the exact opposite. Get your MBA. Like if you want to be in the C-suite and you don't understand the rest of the business's language, like you're not going to succeed. I'm as comfortable talking to our CFO about things that impact our capital and operational budget, and how it's going to impact our EBITDA as I am talking with our technical teams about battling botnets or doing code reviews.
So true. I'm glad you mentioned that because I feel like that is something that CISOs tend to forget, younger CISOs, right? Is that it is about business, about moving forward in business. And if you can't speak business, you are going to have a little bit harder time in the role.
Well, and we had I'll give you a good example. You can translate it to things that make sense to the business if you understand it then too. We were having a problem with a lot of scraping going on our website via automated botnets and stuff that we started to really hammer in because
oh yeah, that was me scraping for, the cheapest price, right?
My predecessor had thought that this was normal traffic. And it turned out it was over 60% of calls for flight searches was fraudulent bot scraping. So as we started to smack them down and get into this pitched battle of, we adjust, they adjust, we adjust until we made it so expensive that they went on to an easier target because they realized they're here to stay now. Like they're going to keep smacking us around. We're just going to go to somebody easier because it's not worth our time anymore. We made it expensive for them. After that, I had to sit down and talk to our chief marketing officer about, look, like our unique number of visitors are, in the airline industry, it's called look to book ratio, which is basically how many people look at flights versus convert to a booking. So it's your customer conversion rate. Like our metrics for that are going to drastically change.
Yeah.
Because we've fed all this bogus amount of searches off of our site and like it impacts us financially as well. And I had to talk to the CFO about that as well, because it's going to change our look to book ratios. And we have contracts that are based on the number of look to books that we have and reset their expectations. And like even a year later, it still freaks them out a little bit. And I've had to, combat a little bit of talks of, hey, our unique number of visitors is down year over year by 20%. Okay, chief marketing officer, does that correlate to a 20% drop in bookings? No, well, bookings are up. Okay, well, we talked about this. Yep. That 20% drop in unique visitors is because this was all botnets that we've now weeded off and battled out of the site.
I think a lot of people in just any business can take that away. And, marketing in general, like all the bots, all the scrapers, AI now, scraping sites, I just read a story where open source, I think it was Read the Docs, for example, just got hit with like a $5,000 a month bill or something ridiculous because AI was just scraping the site, So it's kind of like a vanity metric, right? With marketing, it's like you have all these people coming and hitting, but what's the quality of that? Is that a real person or is it a bot? And I imagine you guys have that problem tenfold compared to everyone else because everyone's trying to scrape for ticket prices and all that, try to get ahead of the actual pricing. I know
sometimes we even have it with our own partners where like Kayak, like we have an API dedicated for them and they'll hit the API and then they'll hit our public site as well to validate.
Oh, really?
They're actually getting the same price that the public gets. And like we had to have a conversation with them about that and like what are acceptable rate limits for this.
Yeah, right.
Like we're not going to allow that on a one-to-one basis. Like, again, we have contracts that are impacted by our look to book ratio.
So
your level of trust.
Now, when I actually go to a site and I look at the ticket price of my flight, and then I come back 5 days later, are you guys recording that and changing the ticket price based on how interested I am on returning visits and things like that?
No, we're not basing it on user metrics so much, but there is definitely pricing components that go into that. And like AI is going to enhance that even further. I mean, you're starting to see fast food restaurants do demand-based pricing.
Yes.
So it's one of the use cases that's being pitched by every vendor in that space for, business intelligent pricing.
So I imagine, security companies might have demand-based pricing too in the future, right? That'd be crazy.
I mean, you already know this too, being in the offensive space, that they operate these as business. Like, it still amazes me, like how many executives you get in that like have no idea of like, threat actors have help desks. They're starting to hire, especially like the ransomware companies, they're starting to hire negotiators.
Customer service representatives for your ransomware and
Yep.
DDoS operators.
They have layoffs if you're not making your profit margins that they need. Like,
It's a legit business.
it is. And like, it still amazes me how many like executives you tell that to. They're like, really? Like,
Probably ran better than some some legit businesses. They make money. They make a lot of money, right? And so it's business is business. Now, what do you guys do for offensive security, kind of in a proactive approach? Is there anything that you have your teams do?
we've started to implement where we do monthly exercises of actually simulating a threat actor inside of our environment. And we'll do stuff like, say, reactivate a retiree's account, give them some elevated access, and start them performing and doing actual lateral movement things without giving any knowledge to the rest of the security team, to then actually monitor how long it takes us to detect it and how we respond. And then, do kind of like a purple team engagement after that, where we follow up of, okay, let's sit down after that, do a debrief and after action report, and figure out, if we didn't detect it, why not? If we did, how quickly did we detect it? Can we improve upon that? If we didn't, how can we write something better to detect it? And, coming up with new ideas every month where we're simulating different methodologies and using actual TTPs that somebody already inside the network would do.
Yeah. Do you take any real world events to help drive that, or?
We do, depending on what the threat actors are commonly using and stuff. Like, I'll give you an example. A good example is MGM last year and Caesars, and, the social engineering uptick that you've seen in general in MFA.
Yeah.
Is resetting somebody's MFA account.
Yep.
And, reusing that and seeing how long it would take, like following the knock through of detecting and intentionally resetting somebody's MFA.
Yeah, I look at Change Health, for example, right? It's like you can have a system out there that's missing that MFA. And us as attackers, we're really great at, finding the one thing that's missing something and taking advantage of it. And I feel like in an organization, you have so many things going on, and it's kind of hard to get that coverage and identify that. Are you guys, in your offensive approaches to doing those exercises, are you looking at things at scale on the perimeter, on the internal? Where are you guys kind of focusing your efforts?
I mean, we're focusing our efforts primarily internally. I mean, externally, we do a fairly decent job of having a really tight perimeter, but like any company, I mean, if you look at the internal versus the external scans for what's an acceptable vulnerability and time to patch and stuff, like external, you have to be hard. Internal, there's more forgiveness and forgiving ground. But like the reality is the more dwell time or time on target that you have, the more damage that you do. You hear about somebody exfiltrated, 1 million records, or look at Ticketmaster, 500 million customer records.
Yep.
Like, they didn't do that in 30 seconds. Like, they had time on target. You look at how pervasive MGM was taken over last year. I mean, they were in there pervasively for an extended period of time. And, the soft, chewy middle scares me more than the external. And like, that's why the focus of these exercises too is really on mean time to detect and remediate, because any dedicated hacker, like if they really want it, they're going to find a way in. It's the key is really how quickly you can detect that and respond to that and how you respond. I mean, we got hit by Move It last year, and, there's always an element of luck too, but I mean, we detected it and, through user behavior analytics and had it blocked and shut off, that we only lost a really small amount of files. And we actually had it blocked before there was even any public knowledge and anybody knew that there was a 0-day vulnerability in Move It. Like, that's an ideal state. Like I said, there's always an element of luck. So,
right.
Knock on wood, we keep that streak of luck going. But, like I said, we focus big time on how quickly can we detect and respond.
Do you feel like that is the primary thing that you've gotten the most value from, is running those exercises to kind of say, as a leader, like, where do I invest more in? And are you correlating it against some sort of framework like MITRE ATT&CK or something to kind of help
We
you decide?
tend to leverage MITRE ATT&CK
Okay.
is doing that. But like I said, then we also do we get a lot of different threat intelligence feeds. And because we're critical infrastructure, we get a lot of early advanced notice about a lot of attack surfaces seeing. And like, that's one of the neat things about the aviation industry in general, despite, that we're all competitors on a cybersecurity front, we all coordinate and cooperate really, really well. In fact, there's a tabletop exercise coming up where we're coordinating with the FAA and TSA and CISA and the airlines together to be like, what would be our unified response to some attacks? And, even when you think about it, like, we're competitors, but like, if our pilots need to get somewhere, they can just hop on any other airline's flight and they'll fly them to where they need to get to their plane. Like, you don't see that cooperation between competitors in a lot of industries, and that extends to cybersecurity. I'm on regular calls with, pretty much all of the aviation industry CISOs, and we intelligence share and cooperate on a regular basis.
Anything else that aviation and travel and logistics, like being a CISO, that's been unique that you've learned?
I mean, there's things that people don't think about from an aviation perspective, like during times of war and stuff. Like, if you look, especially like, in Iraq and Afghanistan, that there's a lot of leverage, especially like in the initial days of troop movements, because there's the civilian air reserve fleet. And like, we're targeted by state sponsored actors too, who want to get in and sit low and slow. And, say China invades Taiwan, of now they have the ability in some ways to disrupt a piece of troop movements.
Yeah.
And like, people don't think about that. And so like, it surprises people like when they find out that like, wait, you're in the airline and you have a top secret clearance? It's like, yeah, like, we're part of critical infrastructure. And, sometimes people forget why and how important aviation is to moving, not just us around for our holidays, but as well as troop movements and material and product and, the impact and days that it takes to reset when the system gets out of whack too. I mean, Southwest during the holidays 2 years ago and the weather, like, sometimes it takes days to reset the whole system, and Delta's meltdown with CrowdStrike.
Yeah. But I was going to say Southwest, they were good though on CrowdStrike because they use Windows 3.1.
That's the rumor. They're not that bad. Like, they've improved a lot, but their tech is different.
I read that article and I had a good chuckle.
Oh, we all are. Like,
we all have legacy systems.
Easy target right now too.
Yeah.
Oh, like, who doesn't have legacy? Like,
Now, have you
unless
seen
you're a new startup or you have legacy tech.
Yeah. In the airline industry probably has a fair amount of legacy, right? Or
I mean, they do, but I mean, there are newer airlines too. I mean, we're relatively new, and when you compare us to some of the big airlines, and you have new startups like Avelo and Breeze, and so a lot of it depends on the age and size of the airline. But like, there are two big players like in the reservation system game of like Saber's the biggest, which came out of American Airlines, but in some ways was government mandated, and like, that stuff is still, there's a lot of green screen based stuff there. So yeah, there's a lot of tech debt.
Yeah.
And I mean, airlines in general, because they're so CapEx heavy and stuff, like, margins for airlines are extremely low, relatively speaking, and it's a tight market.
Yeah. And you're mentioning, I think that, some of them don't even have CISOs because of that reason.
It's true. Some of them don't take security as seriously as others, but everybody's got a different risk profile. And
True.
I'm not going to throw stones because like,
Right.
everybody approaches it differently. I think that Allegiant takes a very balanced approach, and that's good. But I think they definitely, our board is very security conscientious and aware, and we invest a significant amount in security. And, that's part of the reason I stay at Allegiant.
And you've had a lot of great past experience too. Where you came from was Meta, formerly Facebook.
8 million plus servers.
Yeah. So what challenges you had there as head of infrastructure security, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very different environment. And like, at the end of the day, it's an advertising business. So a lot of people like attack it trying to get free advertising. There's that avenue. But then there's also, because you have 3 billion users in such a global footprint, like, thinking from an attacker's perspective of how am I going to influence an election or public opinion on stuff, like, that was a big learning curve for me, because it's just a very different attack surface.
Yeah, your adversary is very different, right?
It is. They're not, in that case, they're not financially motivated. So like, the state level and as well as psychologically, any of the large tech companies, Google, Amazon, like you have to assume that there are state-sponsored actors working there and
Right.
have wormed their way in and like.
I've been reading the news, and I think every week I just learn of someone new, hired some adversary, like, and made it all the way into the company, went through all the HR reviews, went through the interviews, and then they somehow discovered. It seems like that's happening every week.
It definitely happens. I mean, I'm sure we do it too. Like,
Yeah.
you
Right. Last question I have for you, Dan, is, what makes building a strong cybersecurity team? You've worked with a lot of different teams, and is there anything that you look for specifically when you're hiring for your team?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is the eagerness and the ability to learn quickly because, that's the biggest thing with cybersecurity is you have to be able to absorb knowledge and learn quickly because not only is technology changing, but like, your Windows guys have to know Windows, your Linux guys have to know Linux, your network guys have to know network, your security guys have to know everything.
Yeah.
And like, sometimes I get a little bit of flack about that because there's the big debate on like, how do we solve the security talent gap shortage and stuff? And there's a lot of, well, why can't I get an entry-level job in security? Why is it so hard? Security isn't really an entry-level job. People need to realize that. And like I said, I get heat because some people disagree with that, but I don't. Like, starting a help desk, starting networking, get some foundation of how technology operates and work your way into security. But like,
Yeah, because if you don't have that, you're going to have significant gaps as a cybersecurity professional if you don't know how something works underneath the hood. You gotta understand IT and have that foundation before you can build on the cybersecurity, learn how it breaks, learn how to improve it, learn how to identify if it's misconfigured and whatnot.
it is. And you can all, like, I have a unique experience from the perspective of, I actually was self-taught and I didn't go back until I went back in 2018 and got my degree because I wanted to get my MBA. And I'm like, oh crap, I got to get my bachelor's first. So I got my bachelor's in cybersecurity and information assurance in 2018.
And that's like after how many years you've been working?
So
Yeah.
there's the thing with school. I got through it really, really quick because like I could have taught pretty much all my classes. So I've been through the education system fast enough that like you can only learn so much in school and like being in the security space, they teach you the fundamentals of security, but that doesn't teach you the fundamentals of I'm as comfortable getting on a Windows box and working in AD as I am in Linux or Kerberos, for authentication. I can get on a network switch in Cisco and function as a network admin. I can get on storage gear. I can do SQL, I can do HTML, I can do all sorts of stuff that like you just can only learn so much of that in school. And school is focused on more of the fundamentals of security. And that's why I said, like, to really be good in security, you need to learn to at least have a mid-level of competency on all the different technologies, because then you understand as well how lateral movement works and they move from one piece to another piece. And I mean, you're the same way, it's not just one area of focus, because resources are thin to begin with and budgets are thin. That like no company out there hires, this is my Linux security team, this is my Windows security team, this is my network. It doesn't scale that well. That the expectation is my security people know the security components of all these things.
Absolutely. Well, Dan, thanks for being on. It's a great conversation. If someone wants to follow you and your work and what you're doing, how can they find you?
Man, they can find me on LinkedIn, or they can always just hit me up at https://dan.thecreeds.net or my email dan.creed@thecreeds.net.
Nice. Thanks, Dan.
Appreciate you, man.